Hey everyone, it's Danny here, the guy behind all of the Brethren Assembly Youth Crisis videos that have somewhat become a little infamous, but that's okay. We are here to start conversations. And today's conversation, I am going to address a sentiment that I find to be very harmful, but I see it too commonly in the assembly circles. And I got a few comments that hold this sentiment as well from my past few videos. But before we get to that, I hope you noticed that the title of this video is a question: who is at fault for all the people, young people especially, leaving our very own assemblies? And I hope you have recognized that this question is a faulty question, because the premise of this question is we're trying to pin the blame on somebody, right? We want to find out whose fault is it? Which group of people? And I think putting this in such a black and white way is just not helpful, because this is a very nuanced issue with lots of difficulties, and every single person have their personal struggles, and every situation is unique. So we cannot treat it as such where we, pin the blame on somebody or a group of people wholesale. Unfortunately, this is what I see all too commonly in this discussion around the assemblies and the young people leaving. And the sentiment that I want to address today specifically, it goes something like this. Okay? So one would say the reason why people are leaving the assemblies is because they do not want to obey the Bible. Or these people are leaving for selfish reasons, wanting the church to cater to their needs only. All they care about is how they feel at church, and if they choose to leave, then there must be something wrong with their walk with the Lord. Okay? And of course, this sentiment, this slogan or whatever, is not going to be expressed in that exact way. It might not be expressed so explicitly, and it's going to be expressed to, different degrees, right, of harshness. But it's so expressed commonly enough that I think it is a problem, right? But of course, we want to be nuanced, so I'm not going to say that everybody who loved the assemblies definitely hold to this. But I see enough instances of people holding to this idea to deem it a problem, and I think this is one of the most harmful sentiments that one could have in this entire discussion. And it's harmful towards those who leave. It is harmful towards those who stay. And I'm going to explain why in this video. So how this video is going to go is we are going to list a few popular sentiments that kind of fall under this umbrella category, and I'm going to respond to them. Some of them might be real comments I received. Some of them might be posts I've seen on Facebook pages. Some of them could just be things that I have heard expressed enough in my experience. And I'm going to do my best to come up with a response that is faithful to the Lord, but also compassionate towards as many people as possible, and all while being humble at the same time. But I do want to just give a little warning, is this is something that I feel very strongly about, right? So this is probably going to elicit an emotional response from me. So this video might end up being, a little more emotional. Now, if that comes across as me being uncharitable or mean, just being mean-spirited, I apologize if it comes across that way. That is not my intention. And one last thing before I start is all the videos that I'm going to make from this point on, right? I really don't want people to see it as an attack towards any one person specifically, because I come into contact with people, and people know that me personally, and they know I make these videos. These videos are not to target a specific local church. I'm trying to say that I'm not trying to target my local church, so please don't take it personally. Again, right? I'm not targeting anybody. I'm not targeting any one church entity. I am simply addressing these ideas that I see flowing around, or maybe phenomena, or maybe problems I see within the system. So please don't see it as a personal attack. I know it's easy to do so because, if you're someone who loved the assemblies, these kinds of discussions, it may elicit a personal and emotional response because you love it so much. And oftentimes we love a certain system or a group of people, or, a church doctrine, a church group so much that we kind of take that on as a part of our own identity, right? And when that idea, that group, that system, whatever it is attacked, or even just, some question is placed upon it, some critique, some constructive criticism, we feel like our very own identity is being attacked. And the reality is, it is not. And if you feel like I'm kind of giving that to you, right, that's not my intention. I'm just here to start a helpful conversation and hopefully change some minds and make the body of Christ a stronger and more compassionate and a better place, if you see what I'm saying. So I think that's enough babbling from me of the about all the disclaimers and all that. Let's jump into this topic and let's get the discussion going. So let's get into sentiment number 1. This is a post that I'm about to quote here, a post I saw on a Brethren Facebook group. And this is a sentiment that I encounter all the time, right? It expressed all the time to different degrees, but I just find it to be tremendously unhelpful. So I am going to quote this post now. The post says this: I see so many giving critiques of the Plymouth Brethren meetings, saying this or that is wrong, or this needs to be changed to make things more interesting or relevant. For the most part, is more a matter that we are living in the last days in the midst of the church of Laodicea. I brought a young man to meeting yesterday. He hasn't been saved very long and is having to attend a chaotic, semi-charismatic, modern worship church. As we were leaving meeting yesterday, he looked at me and said that I had ruined him because he was never going to be satisfied with any form of corporate worship again after sitting in the Plymouth Brethren Remembrance meeting with teaching service. The dissatisfaction I encounter for some in this group is more of a reflection of their walk than a rebuke of the brethren. Okay, let's start with some points of agreement between me and this brother in Christ here. Okay, I always like to start with agreements. I never denied that there are those who choose to leave the brethren for very superficial and just not good reasons. And indeed, some are very drawn to brethren worship, right? So some people leave for bad reasons, and some people just by nature like the way we worship. All these things that are mentioned in that post, none of those are false. None of those are false. They happen in some circumstances. The problem I take is when one takes this idea and applies it to all circumstances. Okay, that is the big problem I have. Now, to be fair to the brother who posted this, right, he's saying that the dissatisfaction he encountered from some, right, in the group of people who leave and walk away, right, some of them is more of a reflection of their walk than a rebuke of their brethren. Okay, so fair enough. I respect that. I think that's accurate and fair. Unfortunately, for the most part, I wouldn't even say the most part, but for the most part, in my experience, those who hold this sentiment towards those who walk away, they kind of just cast that upon every person who walks away. Every single person, right? And whenever the conversation is brought up about, oh, this person decided to leave, or just the whole idea of people leaving, right, it's immediately countered with, well, it is because they have a problem with their walk and they don't want to obey the Bible. And oftentimes, they bring up an experience they had before where somebody from a church that we deem unbiblical, they come into the Plymouth Brethren meeting and it's like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I decided to stay. And they use that example, all of a sudden, now that example is kind of like the golden rule, where it just proves that, oh, we're definitely better and we're definitely doing everything right, right? So here comes my pushback. With this type of reply, it heavily implies that those who leave the brethren bear all the responsibility while the assemblies bear none. And I mentioned earlier, right, they use the experience as the golden rule. It almost as if personal experience becomes an infallible source of information from a lot of the people that I encounter and converse with. So the conclusion is that people who have their issues with their walks of God, those are the only ones who are leaving the brethren assemblies. Okay, so you be very careful with this, right? When you say some, then that's okay, right? Then we can have a discussion about that. But if all you are saying is this, that's your explanation to the question why people are walking away. If you're going to make a wholesale judgment like that, and only you know if you're making a wholesale judgment like that because you have your own mind, but if you really do think that way, you need to go interview every single person who has left a Brethren assembly, and you need to make that that PDF or that PowerPoint or that spreadsheet, and then you report back to me with some hard data proving to me that every single one of those person left because of the reason that you mentioned. I know that sounds harsh, but unfortunately, if we want to be fair and charitable and loving towards those people, then let's represent them properly, and let's not put them all under one umbrella and just cast that judgment on them, because it's a very serious accusation to say someone has a problem with their walk with the Lord or someone doesn't want to obey the Bible. Okay? And I don't think it's fair either to say that, I don't want to say the assemblies as a whole, but let's just say maybe it's the church culture that they're in, the assembly culture, the particular assembly culture, or whatever it is. We're saying that the assemblies can't bear any fault, because we say that by default when we say it's always the fault of the person who chooses to leave. I just urge anyone who is inclined to judge someone to leave like this to, at the very least, hear them out and be open to new possibilities, because we really need to be careful. Our minds are not infallible, and the assemblies are not infallible, and our church systems are not infallible. The body of believers that are in the assembly is not infallible. We are not automatically immune to all critique, and we cannot afford to idolize any aspect about our church aside from the fact that Christ is the head. If we do any of those things, we kill any opportunities to reform any sins that are within, right, our own group. And I'm suggesting there are sins, because guess what? There's sins in every group. But if we think that the system is perfect, then we, by default, think that there will be no sins that we can fix. And any fixing is actually just taking away from perfection, right? Do you see how that's a really, really dangerous mindset that totally puts a monkey wrench in any change, positive change? And the attitude of non-self-examination, it is extremely unattractive to those who are genuinely faithful, but trying to be honest as well with their faith. And especially when there's so many moral failings and abusive leadership within Christendom already. I'm not saying that, there's so many of that the assemblies, but we already have a bad rep. Okay, so to those who are looking from the outside in, all they see are a group of people that deem themselves, not personal selves, but deem this group or the system as infallible, incorruptible, then obviously they're going to see the danger. Now, for a little disclaimer, I'm not saying that every single person who loves the Brethren Assembly thinks that way, right? It's expressed in degrees, and some people would be more reasonable than others. Again, but I do see this enough to think that it's important to bring up, right? So I'm not accusing you of holding this if you're someone who's in the Brethren and loves the assemblies, but I'm just saying that this is something that I'm seeing very commonly, and this is something we should speak up against, right? If this is something that you're seeing, then you have a responsibility to say, hey, let's not idolize something that we shouldn't idolize, and let's be fair and charitable and just hear people out, okay? I want to stand up a little bit for those who choose to leave, right? If they're leaving for a right reason, if their conscience is right, but then again, if you think your church system is perfect, then their conscience cannot be right. Why would you leave something that's perfect already? But let's say, for argument's sake, that their conscience is actually right. Being judged like this will ensure that they never return to us ever again. They will go find those who actually want to love them properly and are attentive to their needs, listen to their struggles. They don't want to come back to those who, the second they leave, they throw some kind of flaw into them, some kind of fault, and then they push that sin onto the person who's leaving without even hearing them out in the first place, right? Again, this is something very, very dangerous and very, very damaging and demoralizing to someone who might be struggling within our church system. Additionally, I want to go back to that specific comment a bit and talk about the personal example that this gentleman gave of someone who really did love the Brethren services. And this person was from, quote, a chaotic Pentecostal or charismatic church, right? Okay. And he preferred the Brethren service over other services to a great deal. And I think that's great, right? Good for that person. I'm happy that they have found something that is persuasive and beautiful to them, right? But that's one person. And one person does not form a valid argument. The most that gives is just proving that, yeah, there are some people from which the Brethren meetings work, which I do not agree with. But that does not prove that, the Brethren services are perfect. It's just anecdotal. And this particular instance highlights another one of my concerns is sometimes, and again, this is not all people, but I encounter it enough to think it's a problem that I should bring up for discussion. Sometimes I find that personal experience seems to trump everything else in the assembly circles when we talk about some of these issues. And maybe we bring up a critique of how we gather and things like that. Very quickly, a personal experience is brought up, and that personal experience is somehow treated as something that has really, it's infallible, almost. At least it feels that way to me. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. Of course, not as infallible as the Brethren's interpretation of the Bible, of course. But when faced with critique, right, sometimes the person giving the critique is smack dead in the face with a personal experience from somebody that seems to go against this critique. So let's say I'm critiquing that maybe the Brethren service lacks life, or we could do this better, or something like that. Immediately, right, somebody could bring it up. It's like, well, I brought someone from a chaotic Pentecostal service to ours, and they really loved it. So therefore, you're wrong. They're not going to say exactly like that, but they're going to bring it up like that and expect that result. Again, we need to be better at conversations and disagreements. Personal experience has its merits. Absolutely. I'm not discrediting that. But we need to learn to hear the other party out, because guess what? They also have their personal experiences. So we must work together and put our experiences together to try our best to come up with a picture of reality and a solution. We must think beyond our own bubbles and seek out perspectives that might be different from ours, perspectives from others. The world is so much bigger than the fishbowl of our personal experiences. So that's something, again, we need to be really attentive about. Okay, if we really want to make headway in reform, in improving ourselves. The bottom line is you are free to think of people however you like, but your attitude towards people has a consequence, and people will respond in kind to your attitude towards them. One last thing I want to point out is this common use of the "we are living in the Laodicean age" argument. First of all, I just have a genuine question about this whole end times eschatology thing. Now, I'd love to hear some responses to this. Why do we assume that the 7 churches in Revelation represent 7 periods in the church age? Why do we assume that? Right? So many people use that to prophesy that we are living in the last age and things are going to be bad, and we should take that for granted. But if they really do represent the church age, why do they only match up with the Western church, but not anywhere else? Is the Eastern church just invalid? What about the global South, right? Africa, China, all these places. Christianity does a lot there, right? The church thrives there. It's thriving at the current moment, thriving better than us here in the West. So why do we only apply these churches to the Western Christian experience? And are we just trying too hard to match things up, right? Genuine question. But secondly is the more important point, right? The whole Laodicean age argument, I find, has been used a lot as an excuse. Again, nobody's going to state this explicitly, but it creates a sort of mindset. I'm going to explain. I don't know if this is true for this specific commenter or the guy who made the post, but I think we should still talk about it. Sometimes I find that all possibilities of the Brethren Assemblies reform and change are dismissed by some because using the excuse that we're living the Laodicean age, right? And the logic behind this is, well, we're living the Laodicean age, so it's natural that people are going to walk out because guess what? We're living in an evil age, and people are going to be evil. People are going to turn away. This is just something normal, right? This is again, right? This is the person's fault. They are the ones who are, they got a problem, they got a flaw, and the assemblies are doing no wrong. This is just a natural byproduct of living in this age. Again, I think this is a defeatist attitude and a dangerous attitude. It's true we live in an age where people are indeed lukewarm and are embracing evil, but does that mean, therefore, we should just give up and assume everyone who's leaving us is a lukewarm and evil person? Do you think Christ would like that attitude? What would Christ want us to do? I think he will want us to try harder than ever before to win souls, and to those who are leaving, to examine them honestly, converse with them, and see if this is actually true. If we truly are living in a Laodicean age where things are evil, I just think, well, let's try harder then. Let's try harder. Let's improve ourselves. Let's reform the things we can reform, and let's reach out to more souls. Let's not shrink back and sit back and just say, yeah, we're just watching things naturally unfold before our eyes. This is just it's just a part of the game. No, let's not do that, right? Let's be on our feet and be ready to take action to serve our masters better. No matter what church age we are in, no matter what kind of eschatology that you hold, the commands are the same from the Lord waiting for his second coming for us Christians. We got no excuses whatsoever. And that's basically all I have to say about that particular post. Okay, the second sentiment I want to respond to is this. So I've gotten some comments that, particularly one comment under the interview that I did with my friend Sean, who has decided to go to a new church. I got a comment that accused us of compromising truth. And again, we are immediately equating the brethren way of doing things with truth. But they're accusing us of compromising truth because of our feelings. It makes a point that all of this is all about our feelings, right? The fact that we might want to leave, where my friend left already. It's all about our feelings. If it weren't about us, we wouldn't even mention anything at all. And it makes the point that the church should be judged by its doctrine, not by the way we feel when we are there. I find this to be a very serious accusation to make against two guys you saw one video about on the internet. You don't know anything about us. Aside from the information that we chose to disclose in that video, you don't know our personal experiences. It is an accusation that should not be made carelessly. And at the very least, right, there should be some investigation. Why don't you ask us before saying that we're doing everything by feelings and we're compromising truth? Because again, it's such a serious accusation to make against a faithful Christian, and it's highly demoralizing and sad. And anyways, sadly, many who decide to leave the brethren are immediately judged like this. And when many within the brethren are referring to those who have left, right, again, they're being put under this umbrella with no attempt made to investigate or communicate. And secondly, I found this to be a harmful sentiment. I think it is unwise to assume that a church's doctrine does not have a direct impact on how people treat one another in the congregation. And how people treat one another has a tremendous impact on how one feels at church. Feelings are a thing. And feelings are not invalid. In fact, feelings are important. That's why God gave us emotions. If a church has a healthy doctrine, would it not produce healthy Christians? Would not healthy Christians in turn produce healthy fellowship? Unfortunately, many who have reached out to me to talk about their experience leaving the Brethren Assemblies, they told me just the opposite about their assemblies. Again, not all assemblies. There are lots of healthy ones, okay? But there are enough testimonies that I hear about this for me to take this seriously, right? Many are telling me that indeed it wasn't a healthy place. It wasn't a healthy congregation. It wasn't a healthy fellowship, and it made them feel terrible. Because guess what? Maybe the doctrine wasn't so healthy at that particular church, and it in turn produced unhealthy Christians. Right? This is something we need to take seriously, and this is a possibility. Just because you are an assembly doesn't mean you are immune to these things. Thirdly, I think feelings actually matter a great deal. Does a spiritual leader not consider the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of his flock? If it does seem like certain people within your congregation are truly struggling greatly, and if they're making the claim that certain aspects about the congregation is contributing to those problems, or at least it's not helping with it, to the point where they had to leave, and so many have expressed to me that this is exactly what happened, at the very least, this should cause us to do some serious self-reflection about the way we do things, or about our attitudes, or about our culture. When there are so many signs that something needs to change, when the church is showing symptoms, how can we possibly say, well, we just assume that we have biblical doctrine? Then it must be their fault. It must be the fault of those people's feelings. If it wasn't about them, they wouldn't have said anything in the first place. Let me give you a personal anecdote for this, and you take this however you would. For me, a lot of the things that I talked about in my previous videos, those things do not apply to me. But I do see those things applying to many other people and are hurting them, or at least not helping them. There are only a few things that apply to myself. But here I am trying to make a case for a lot of the people who leave. Okay? So this is not just about me. If it was just about me, I would have stayed quiet and I would have just left. But I care for the assemblies, and I know there are many who do. And those who do, sometimes they might speak out. And if all they're encounter with is that counter saying, well, if it didn't affect your feelings, then you wouldn't have said anything about it. How demoralizing is that for someone who's trying to help? Okay, let's just have a little more compassion and patience for our brothers and sisters who might be struggling a little bit. Okay? And last point, of course, there are those who leave solely because of selfish reasons. Of course, there are those who leave just because they didn't feel good, right? And of course, there are those who say something only because it affected their feelings. But I need not mention them because they're mentioned a lot. They're talked about all the time, right? Whenever this topic is brought up, those are the only people that get talked about. My goal is to raise a voice for those who are genuinely in need, but are also being reasonable and faithful at the same time. And that's all I have to say about that point. Let's move on to sentiment number 3. And when I read this comment, boy, it was so discouraging and it made me really, really sad. It also made me a little angry and upset at the same time. So I might get a little emotional, I don't know, responding to this. So please forgive me if it comes across as me being unpolite. But here goes. The comment goes like this. Yeah, go. But you will not have it easy finding a good, solid, Bible-believing, Bible-preaching evangelical church actively seeking to see unbelieving people become committed followers of Jesus Christ. A warm and welcoming fellowship of believers who engage with ... right? He's responding to another comment where a lady is telling me to go find a church that's like that. So back to his comment. He continues to say, see, the young are fleeing those churches too. It really has to do with the attitude of the young. I know some who are stable and staying in place to brighten their corner. But most young people are entitled and they look for catering to their entitlements everywhere they go. Again, I was honestly so discouraged, man, when I read that. After you try to be thoughtful and humble and loving in a video you make, and then all you get is, this. A serious accusation against young people who leave, the people you have a heart for. You can understand why I would be so saddened by that comment. Seriously, this wholesale approach to young people who leave has got to go. Again, I know this gentleman is saying most. Even saying most is a problem because you're assuming that this is the majority effect. This is baseless, unloving, and uncharitable judgment towards young people. But I must say, and I'm a broken record at this point, of course there are some young people who are like that. And there's probably lots of them. But there are many who are genuinely seeking the Lord but are struggling and choose to go elsewhere where they could be fed better. The shotgun style judgment where you just rain down these shells on every single young person who leave, assuming that they're just entitled. This will ensure that these young people who are passionate, faithful, and they got energy to do things, this ensures that they never come back to your church to bless your church and to do God's work at your church. They'll do God's work somewhere else, not at your church. You know why? Because all they come back to and all they'll remember is people who judge them without even taking the time to understand them. Nobody wants to deal with that. Secondly, this attitude kills any chance, again, of any actual improvement or reformation of sins within the church, or just improvements in general. Because the automatic assumption is that the people who leave, it is their fault. We can change no more because we are perfect. I already iterated this in previous response. Also, if the young people are actually in need, and don't tell me you don't believe in this, but I hear this way too much from preachers from the pulpit and the assemblies that, yeah, this is a generation that needs a lot of help, and I agree. They say this generation is a lot of things negative, okay? So don't tell me that you don't believe in that, okay? If we believe that the young people are indeed in need, why can we not make some accommodations for them to make their time easier? Why not? Is it really so wrong to hear the cries of the flock and make some changes for them? Is it wrong to somehow meet in the middle? Is it wrong to talk about it at least? Right, we should at least consider them seriously before we call them entitled. Do young people's voices get the same amount of attention as the voices of the older? Right? This is something that we must consider very carefully, because if our immediate assumption about young people is that they are entitled, then of course they're not going to get the same amount of attention as the older people. And as a result, you create a culture where the young people realize that, yeah, I'm not being catered to here to any degree. All the catering is going towards a certain other group. Then let me go somewhere where I can be catered to at least a little bit. What's so wrong with that? If I were to, overnight convert the brethren service worship into a Pentecostal style worship, and maybe the people who prefer the more traditional worship start complaining, do I call them entitled? No, because this is a culture that they're wildly not accustomed to. So can we not at least have a conversation about the other way around? Anyways, the next point I want to make about this is there is an assumption that good churches are only in the brethren. And the gentleman told me that I'll have an extremely hard time finding it anywhere else. Look, if you're faced with that claim when you are at least just trying to go out and explore, and a brother tells you from the assemblies that you're going to have a very hard time finding a good church. No one's going to be as good as us. Go find out for yourself. There's a very small chance that the person who told you this has been to every single church that is accessible to you in your town. And most times the people who say this are, again, actually, I take that back. I take that back. A lot of the times, people who make this claim are people who have been in assemblies for decades, occasionally visiting one or two other style churches, or someone who's went to a terrible church and switched to the brethren. But they equate those experiences as them being around the block for all kinds of churches. And they just use those one or two impressions and say, well, this must be what it's like everywhere. Okay? Again, I'm not saying most people are like that, but I'm saying enough people are like that for you to at least go and find out for yourself. Okay? It's a frog in a well perspective. You want to listen to someone who actually went far and wide, but you still would like to find out for yourself. And here's someone telling you that I believe that good churches are there. Because guess what? The Holy Spirit doesn't move just in brethren assemblies. If the assemblies are truly the only good churches out there, we wouldn't be dwindling. We really wouldn't be. Okay? There's a little story I like to tell regarding this. I think it's worth our time. It's a Chinese story. I don't know if it's of Chinese origin, but I was told when I was little. It's a little horse trying to cross a river, but he has no idea how deep the river is. And a big old water buffalo walks by, and the little horse asks him, "Hey, water buffalo, is it okay to cross this river?" Water buffalo's like, "Yeah, of course it's fine. It's just like a walk in the park for me." And the water buffalo walks across the river, no problem. And the little horse is like, "Okay, awesome. Let me go try that." And he dips his toes in. A little squirrel from the tree screams at the horse like, "Stop! Stop! My brother, he drowned in that river yesterday. Do not cross that river. It's dangerous." The horse is so scared. He's like, "Oh, who do I listen to?" The mummy horse comes. The mummy horse knows the little horse very well and say, "You should be fine, little horse. Just cross the river with me." And they cross it together. The little horse was fine, right? The moral of the story is different people have different kinds of experiences, but different people are different. They perceive the world in different ways. And the advice they give you, it's not the golden rule. You can use different perspectives to try to find out the reality for yourself. And I'm referring to, experiences with churches here, right? Some people just don't like churches in general, and they tell you that brethren are the only way to go because they think it's the best way, when in reality it just caters to their needs more. Some people tell you that, oh, all churches are great. You need to find out for yourself. And then your mummy horse is the Bible, right? You need to find out with the Bible in your hand a good church. Okay, so go experience some things for yourself. A big thing that I find within the assemblies, or maybe this is everywhere, is that people really want you to take their experiences seriously. And sometimes they mean well, but sometimes this is an attempt for you to not try things because they think they've tried it all already and their formula must work for you. Most of the time it doesn't, right? You got to live your own life. Okay, that's enough sidetracking from Danny. Let's get back to responding to that comment. Okay, so there was a claim that's made that young people are fleeing those churches. So like the 0.1% of actual good churches out there. Young people are fleeing those too. Therefore, don't bother. This is just a global phenomenon. It's not the Assembly's fault. It's the young people's fault. They're just leaving everywhere because guess what? They're so entitled. Well, first of all, this is like a sibling saying, well, he did it, so I can do a bad thing too. This kind of attitude. Well, guess what? Let's be real about it. If the responsibility lies with us to any degree at all, just because other churches also lose young people doesn't mean we give up on trying to solve this problem. Okay? Let's try harder. Secondly, those other churches, maybe they are losing people. And I think yes, indeed, all across the board, churches are losing people en masse. But compared to many assemblies, and if we just take the general, those churches are still thriving way better than we are. The good ones are seeing people saved. They have very engaging worship. The good ones have solid messages and a community that feels alive. And young people, they crave those things. And by golly, they have more young people than we do. So even if they are losing people, they are still far more, they're still doing a better job. Let's just say it like that. Okay? And lastly, it seems like this gentleman has made up his mind about most young people. They are entitled. Except for the ones who decide to stay in the assembly because, they listen and they act how you want them to act. Look, this is why so many don't want to walk through our doors, because they sense that there's an inherent prejudice against young people who dare venture out of the assemblies. There's an inherent prejudice against young people that they are just entitled and foolish and dumb. Again, of course, not everybody holds that prejudice, but it is prevalent enough that I should address it. Okay? The gentleman who made the comment says, those who are stable enough to stay, those who are stable are the ones who stay behind and brighten their corner. Well, unfortunately, the reality is, guess what? Stability for Generation Z, Generation Alpha, my generation, right? I'm Generation Z. Stability is something that is a heck of a luxury in this generation. Stability is hard to find. Mental health is running rampant within my generation. The reality is, most of us are not stable. And you know what? A lot of us who decide to stay in the assemblies, or their time in the assemblies, it turns out, has not helped whatsoever with our mental stability. So if stability is a requirement for being a good Christian and staying behind lightning your corner, then we never have hope. We never have hope, because it seems like stability is your pre-requirement for people who can stay in the assemblies. Like, goodness gracious. I feel so bad. I feel so bad for people who are genuinely struggling. But unfortunately, that's just a very common experience. A lot of people have expressed this to me. You don't feel like you belong in your local assembly because you are not stable. To fit in, you have to at least appear stable, because everyone else either has it all together or is pretending like they have it all together. And for those of us who maybe speak out about this instability of ours and hoping that maybe we can get some help with it, maybe we can make some changes that make it better, how are we treated? We are just looking for people to cater towards our entitlement. At least it might appear that way to you. Again, I'm not saying this is everybody. It definitely is not. I would say this is probably a more rare case than the other ones that I talked about, but still, it happens enough that I need to raise a voice on it. And if you see it happening, you should speak up against it. And we should be kind to our young people, because they really, really need help. Okay, this is going to be the last sentiment that I'm going to push back against, at least from this particular perspective. And the comment goes something like this. You left out the most prominent reason, and that is that young people are going to leftist-leaning schools and universities. Of course, their minds being corrupted there, therefore they leave, right? And people are leaving churches in general because of secular influence. In essence, we're living in a secularizing world. Again, it's kind of like the Laodicean age argument. You know, this is happening because, well, the fault actually lies on the world. First of all, this statement, as far as my knowledge goes, is not exactly accurate. And I might be being nitpicky here, but let's just try to be as accurate as we can. Gavin Ortlund from Truth Unites, he made a video on how we respond to the deconstruction movement. And we are living in a cultural moment where many people are de-churching, right? They're walking out the church doors and they're not returning. And the rate of these people walking out, right, the numbers are greater. The number of people that we're losing are greater than those we have gained from the first and second Great Awakening combined. Right? Go check out his video. I'll link it in the description. Very helpful. And in that same video, Gavin Ortlund, he makes a case that we cannot blame it all on public schools or secular universities. The rate of deconstruction and de-churching there is not necessarily higher than elsewhere. So people who attend secular universities and all of that, you know, the rate of them leaving the church is not higher than those who did not attend a secular university. Okay? See 24-minute and 46-second in his video that I'll link in the description for this case. Okay? So we cannot exactly blame it all on that. Again, we have to see if we hold some responsibilities as well. We have to examine ourselves. We can't just blame it all on the secularizing world. But for the sake of argument, let's assume that this statement is actually right. Okay, fair enough. We are living in a secular tongue twisters, secularizing West. It's very evident, right? It's very, very evident. However, if you use this excuse to ignore all my other points about the things that we could improve, then you risk losing what little faithful young Christians you have left in your own assemblies who have not been affected by the secularizing world. This is another case of shifting the blame. If you can blame it on the world, you need not take any responsibility, and the assemblies remain without excuse. Not excuse, oh my gosh. The assemblies remain without any fault. There we go. Sadly, the truth is, while many are led astray, Many young Christians are not leaving because they're misguided by the world or they're being fooled by the world. They actually found greener pastures elsewhere where they could serve the Lord better, where it's a better environment for them than their local assembly. Also, if the culture is taking so many from us, what are we doing about it? What are we doing about it? We used to be the talk of the town, us Plymouth Brethrens. We used to make such an impact for the Lord. The missionary field used to be our game. But unfortunately, in the present day, I'm seeing a dwindling number of brethren assemblies making moves to change the culture. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, but we seem to complain so much about the culture. We have so many conferences about, this fallen world, how to live in a fallen world. But we seem to do very little about it to change things. Now, many would argue that this comes from our eschatology, where we believe that the world is only going to get worse and worse. Therefore, it's hard to put in any more effort because you don't see any hope in changing things. You know it's not going to change. So why not live as if you believe things could be changed? Wouldn't Christ want us to try our hardest even when things seem bleak? And are our loudest ones, the ones who complain the most about the world and how evil it is, are they the ones doing the most, or are they the ones doing the least? Do we just sit in our comfortable little Christian circles, in our conferences, our Bible studies, our prayer meetings? Prayer meetings are good, actually. Prayer meetings do a whole lot. They make a lot of changes, so I take that back. But we sit in our conferences, our Bible studies, our youth groups, our coffee chats, but we refuse to engage with the world. Again, not all of us. Many of us are out there trying very, very hard, serving very, very hard. And to you, I give you my respect. But for those of us who are not doing anything, do we even get the right to talk about it at all? How awful it is out there? We watch the world burn and we do nothing about it? Just a little question. So let the young man with the passion do it. The young guy who grew up in church seeing nothing but couch commentary, no one's there to teach him. He's going to go somewhere else where he could practice his gift. He's going to go use his passion somewhere else where other people are going to be there as passionate as he is. And that's all I have to say about that. So I'm done with my pushback comments, but now I want to address people like me, for the young person. I can also foresee an attitude from a young person on this. Is the temptation is to start villainizing assembly goers, again, doing a wholesale judgment on those people as well. That's why I've been so careful in this video to say not all, right? But I see enough. We must remember that many in the assemblies and in its leadership are actually people who are trying their best. They're working very, very hard, and they're tired. They're working so hard, harder than I ever worked in my life. But what we face now is decades, maybe even centuries, of the effects of one kind of church culture. Okay? It is layered and it's complicated, and there's just so much stacked against us. Making change is going to be pushing against the current. So, right, you gotta have patience. And you got to realize that many people are trying hard, and it may seem like they're not doing anything, but it's hard to do anything. It's hard to do anything. So let's have grace on our fellow assembly goers. Instead, let's not target them. Let's not make generalizing assumptions about them, right? Let's just target maybe flaws in the system. Maybe target the culture, aspects within the culture. Don't villainize the individuals, rather critique certain mindsets. I think that's a way more helpful way to engage in this conversation. The second it becomes personal, then it's over. Because it's always a two-way street. Respect is a two-person game. You cannot high-five with just one hand, right? Let us stop placing blame, and let us not placing blame on... Let's not do the lazy work. Let's not take the easy way out and just say, blame it all on this, blame it all on that. Let's use our brains and start looking for solutions, because once you really start using your brain, and I have found this out the hard way, once I started talking to people are giving me feedback, I'm realizing, how much more complicated this whole thing is. And I would never place blame on anybody anymore. Right? Because people are people. You can't just, it's not fair towards them. So let's place let's be very careful where we place our blame. Once we start doing that, we'll discover that actually everybody holds some degree of responsibility. Every single person. And everyone is accountable before the Lord to do what they can to remedy and improve things, to brighten their own corner. Young people, older people, people who are disgruntled, people who are satisfied, people who are thinking about walking away. It takes all of us together. If we truly think this is a problem that the young people are leaving the assemblies, then it takes all of us together, working together to fix this problem. And the most harmful thing we could do in our minds is to say that, well, let's give up on these people. Let's not even bother with them because I made an assumption about them. I must be right. It has to be like that. No, we have to kill that mindset in our minds. And we have to look at people as individuals. So let the person who is in a position to access resources that can lead to real change, let the man who can do something about it, do it. And let us repent of our judgment for our fellow brethren. And let us remove that log from our own eye before we remove the speck from our brother's eye. And that's all I have to say about that. Before I end the video, I just want to say thank you for everyone who has given me feedback, and especially thank you to my own church members who have given me corrections about things that I gotten wrong in my previous videos. I really, really appreciate that. That's going to help me tremendously in making my final video. I think I'll release maybe 1 or 2 videos just like this one before the final video. But in the final video, I'm going to give my 2 cents on what we could actually do about this crisis that we're facing in the Brethren Assemblies. Realistic steps, not just idealistic things. Realistic things that we could do on a scale that is realistic. And I'll work really hard on that. It's probably going to be a really long video, but I'll finish that before the end of May. And yeah, hopefully it'll spark some good conversations. If you have pushback for me, corrections, I'm always open to those, so long as you're respectful towards me, and I will respond to you in kind. So thank you for keeping me humble, and thank you for hearing me out. And I am praying for the future of the Assemblies. I hope it's a good one. And God bless until I see you again next time.